I walked into the arbitration room ready to surrender everything. My treacherous sister demanded the flagship restaurant, the brand identity, even our legacy recipes. My lawyer whispered, let her take it. So, I did. Her husband gloated, never suspecting my capitulation would ultimately bankrupt them. The mediator's boardroom smelled of lemon polish and the sharp, metallic ozone of a heavy-duty laser printer. I sat on my side of the massive mahogany table, keeping my hands folded in my lap so no one could see the slight tremor in my left thumb. It wasn't fear. It was the sheer, exhausting weight of keeping a secret for 14 months. Across from me, Renata looked like she had already won. She wore a pristine white silk blouse that probably cost more than a prep cook's monthly salary. Next to her sat her husband, Bowen. Bowen was a venture capitalist who specialized in hostile takeovers of mid-level tech startups. He had arrived in a tailored tweed vest, tapping a heavy gold pen against his leather folio, treating my family's generational restaurant dispute like a minor corporate acquisition. Out in the glass-walled lobby, I could see Sable, Renata's PR manager, aggressively typing on her phone. She was undoubtedly drafting the press release about Renata's triumphant, visionary takeover of our father's legacy. When I arrived that morning, I had smiled at Renata, a tight, polite, sisterly smile. She didn't return it. She didn't know that I already knew everything. The unraveling had started exactly 14 months prior, long before the lawyers got involved. I was doing a routine audit of our seasonal expenses. The restaurant business is a game of pennies, and you survive by knowing exactly where every cent goes. I was sitting at my kitchen island at 2:14 a.m., drinking cold coffee, when an email pinged into my legacy inbox. It was an overdue notice from Pacific Apex Seafood. The account rep, Lachlan, had accidentally CC'd the old management address instead of sending it directly to Renata's new accounts payable system. It was a bill for a premium vendor rebate. Only, the money wasn't routed back into the flagship's operational account. It was being diverted. The next morning, I hired a forensic accountant named Crispin. I didn't tell Renata. I didn't tell the staff. Crispin and I sat in a rented co-working space across town for 3 weeks, pulling every single invoice, delivery manifest, and warehouse log from the past 2 years. What we found was surgically precise. Renata hadn't just dipped into the till. She had funneled exactly $112,400 into a shadow LLC called Oyster and Vine Holdings, an entity she alone managed. She executed this through a series of convoluted financial adjustments deliberately designed to look like routine spoilage write-offs. A rejected crate of lobster here, a returned shipment of corked wine there. In the restaurant industry, spoilage is a fact of life. It wouldn't raise any flags unless you physically cross-referenced the delivery manifests against the warehouse intake logs and the vendor refund checks. I audited the manifests. She never thought I would do the actual dirty work. She always assumed I was too busy running the kitchen to look at the math. Back in the arbitration room, my attorney, Arlo, laid out our files. We had an ironclad defense. Arlo had litigated franchise disputes for 20 years. He was a bulldog in a cheap suit. And earlier that morning in his office, he had told me bluntly that we had the ammunition to destroy her. We could fight for the primary location, the corporate accounts, the trademark, all of it. We could drag her through court for years. Fire it, Arlo had said, tapping a thick file. We expose the LLC, we take the flagship, we push her out. I had looked at him and said, no, give her everything. Arlo had gone completely still. Are you entirely sure? Sign over the downtown location. I told him. The naming rights, the operational accounts, every corporate asset listed in her hostile buyout petition. Do not contest a single clause. Arlo gave me the quiet, devastating look of a man watching a stubborn client drive off a financial cliff and refusing to hit the brakes. He thought my spirit was broken. He thought I was just another exhausted sibling tapping out of a toxic family fight. It wasn't that. I just knew exactly what I was handing her. The mediator cleared his throat, bringing my focus back to the mahogany table. He was a tired-looking retired judge who clearly wanted to be on a golf course. Renata's lawyer began reading the aggressive list of demands. His voice was loud, performing for Bowen. The petitioner demands full and exclusive ownership of the flagship property, the lawyer read. Agreed, Arlo said, his voice flat. Renata blinked. Bowen stopped tapping his gold pen. The petitioner demands exclusive rights to the proprietary branding, logos, and legacy recipe book, her lawyer continued, faltering slightly. Agreed, Arlo said. The petitioner demands full control of the operational capital and current business checking accounts. Agreed, her lawyer stuttered on the fourth demand, looking up as if he needed auditory confirmation. He had heard correctly. Bowen leaned back and tapped Renata's arm. They both smirked. Out in the hallway, Sable snapped a quick photo through the glass, presumably to accompany the victory post. Across the table, I watched Renata's posture relax. It was the physical release of an aggressor who had armed herself for a brutal war and just realized the gates of the city had been left wide open. She gave Bowen a victorious wink. They assumed I had surrendered because I was weak. That was exactly the trap. When Renata's lawyer finished reading, the mediator looked at Arlo. Is the respondent truly contesting none of these terms? We contest none of the terms regarding the flagship property and its associated assets, Arlo said. He reached down and opened a secondary black binder, sliding it across the polished wood toward the mediator. However, we need to clarify the boundaries of the corporate entity being transferred. 4 years before our father passed, I had launched a localized catering platform. I kept it completely separate from the family restaurant group. It was a separate corporate entity, my name exclusively on the charter, with a completely isolated tax ID. I called it Lock Provisions. I kept its infrastructure totally insulated. A mentor had taught me early on that you must always build a secondary lifeboat, and you never paint it the same color as the sinking ship. Renata's legal team had spent months trying to find a loophole to absorb Lock Provisions into the main buyout. The mediator took one look at the incorporation dates in Arlo's binder and dismissed their claim instantly. Lock Provisions predates the shared operational agreement by 4 years and operates under an independent INE, the mediator stated. It remains with the respondent. Renata scowled, but Bowen waved a hand dismissively. He didn't care about a catering catering company. He wanted the brick-and-mortar trophy. Then Arlo turned to the second tab in the binder. There is one final matter before we finalize the transfer of the operational accounts, Arlo said smoothly. During the handover audit, my client discovered a discrepancy in the vendor rebate routing. He produced the spread of invoices Crispin and I had compiled. He laid them out one by one. The spoilage reports, the Shadow LLC documents, the exact total $112,400. The legal term is breach of fiduciary duty. Because Renata was a managing partner at the time of the theft, she wasn't just liable to repay the stolen funds. She was legally required to repay them with aggressive statutory interest directly into the accounts I was now retaining via lock provisions, as I was the injured partner. The mediator reviewed the ledger in silence. He didn't yell. He didn't scold her. He just stared at Renata with the cold, hollow indifference that the legal system reserves for corporate thieves. Is this accurate? The mediator asked her lawyer. Her lawyer looked at the documents, looked at the LLC registration with Renata's signature on it, and visibly swallowed. We would need time to review these accounting anomalies. They aren't anomalies, Arlo said. They are wire transfers, and they mandate an immediate financial penalty against the petitioner's remaining assets before this settlement can close. Renata's face went completely bloodless. Bowen sat forward, the smugness entirely erased from his features, his eyes darting between the papers and his wife. He hadn't known. The great venture capitalist hadn't known his own wife was skimming pennies like a desperate shift manager. The mediator moved to the final signatures. Renata walked out of that room with the flagship restaurant. What she didn't realize, what she would have known if she had bothered to read the municipal notices I received 6 months ago, was that the city council had just finalized a massive 3-year subterranean sewer overhaul on our exact block. Starting next month, the city was going to rip up the entire street. They were going to erect 12-foot chain link fences, deploy heavy excavators, and completely block pedestrian access. It was going to destroy foot traffic. The flagship relied on walk-ins and valet parking for 70% of its dinner rush. Both were about to vanish for 36 months. She walked out with a leased brand name on a dead street. She walked out with an operational account that was about to be gutted to pay off her massive fraud penalty to me. She walked out with zero access to the thriving mobile catering network I had built from the ground up, which didn't rely on foot traffic at all. She acquired every single thing she came in demanding. As they left the lobby, Bowen's tailored vest suddenly looked a lot less intimidating. Sable, the PR manager, had stopped typing. I went back to the lock provisions warehouse, poured myself a glass of cheap bourbon, and finally let the tremor in my thumb stop. I thought it was over. I thought the amputation was clean. It took exactly 3 weeks for the rot to catch up to me. I was at the warehouse loading dock, checking an inventory delivery for a massive corporate retreat we were catering, when my phone rang. It was Lachlan from Pacific Apex Seafood. Hey, Lachlan said. His voice was tight, lacking the usual vendor-client warmth. I need to talk to you about this morning's order. I didn't place an order this morning, Lachlan. We're fully stocked for the weekend. There was a heavy pause on the line. Then why did your sister's new accounts manager just try to run a $12,000 line of credit for prime king crab and beluga, using the lock provisions tax ID? The warehouse around me suddenly felt very cold. Excuse me? The authorization form came through an hour ago, Lachlan said. It has your IN on it, but the delivery address is the flagship. The accounts manager said the two businesses were still operating under a joint credit umbrella. I caught it because the billing zip code didn't match the new system. I flagged it, but what, Lachlan? But they tried to run it with 4 other vendors this week too. Produce, linen services, and the meat purveyor. I talked to those guys. Your sister is leveraging your clean credit to float the flagship. I hung up the phone and stood perfectly still among the stainless steel prep tables. The legal separation was supposed to be a firewall, but the restaurant industry relies on old relationships, paper forms, and net 30 grace periods. Renata wasn't just sinking. She was actively committing tax and credit fraud under my name to stay afloat, exploiting the lag time it took for the vendors' accounting departments to update their corporate structures. I called Arlo. It's wire fraud if she's transmitting this across state lines, Arlo said, his voice crackling over the Bluetooth in my truck as I immediately started driving toward the city. But it's a massive, expensive headache for you to untangle. If she defaults on those vendor lines of credit before we can legally enjoin her, they can and will come after lock provisions. You're the one on the hook for that, Ian. I need the physical authorization forms, I said, gripping the steering wheel. Lachlan said they were signed by hand. If I can prove she forged my signature or authorized an employee to do it, I can shut it down. Don't do anything stupid, Arlo warned. Let me draft a cease and desist. A piece of paper won't stop her from ordering 20 grand in Wagyu beef by tomorrow morning. I snapped and hung up. I pulled onto the street of the flagship restaurant. The city had already started. It was worse than I had imagined. Massive orange plastic barricades choked the intersection. The asphalt was torn open, exposing the dirt and pipes beneath the city. The noise of a pneumatic drill vibrated through the floorboards of my truck. A thick film of concrete dust coated the windows of the restaurant. There wasn't a single customer on the sidewalk. There wasn't even a sidewalk left. I parked 3 blocks away in a paid garage and walked back. I didn't go through the front doors. I went around to the alley, to the delivery entrance. I punched in the old keypad code. The lock clicked green. She hadn't even bothered to change the security codes. I stepped into the kitchen. The familiar smell of roasting garlic and old grease hit me, wrapping around my chest like a heavy, suffocating blanket. This was the floor I had swept when I was 12. These were the line stations where my father had taught me how to break down a whole halibut. Now, the kitchen felt dim. Half the overhead fluorescent bulbs were burned out. At the back prep station, standing over a massive cutting board, was Tam. Tam had been our lead prep chef for 15 years. He was a quiet, fiercely loyal man who moved with absolute precision. But right now, his shoulders were slumped. He was aggressively chopping a mound of white onions, and I could hear the heavy, dull thud of the blade hitting the board. His knife was dull. My father used to fire people if they didn't respect the edge of their knife. Tam, I said quietly. He jumped, the knife slipping and narrowly missing his thumb. He looked up, his eyes widening in the dim light. What are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. I need to see the vendor authorization binder in the back office. Tam looked over his shoulder toward the swinging doors that led to the front of the house. He wiped his hands on his apron. It was stained, and the linen looked thin. It's bad in here, he whispered, stepping closer to me. It's really bad. The linen company stopped picking up. The knife sharpening service hasn't been here in a month. She cut them. She cut everything. I know the street construction is killing the lunch rush, I said. It's not just the lunch rush, Tam said, his voice tight with stress. Vendors are demanding cash on delivery. But yesterday, the new manager came back here and said everything was fixed, said we had new lines of credit. Tam reached into the deep pocket of his apron and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He pressed it into my hand. She's been telling the staff that you are the one holding up our payroll, that you tied up the accounts in court to punish us. I smoothed out the paper. It was a photocopy of an internal memo, signed by Renata. It explicitly blamed my vindictive legal maneuvers for the delayed paychecks, framing her as the victim trying to save their jobs. I'm not holding up anything, Tam, I said, the anger rising hot and sharp in my throat. She's broke, and now she's using my company's tax ID to buy her supplies. The swinging doors from the dining room suddenly pushed open. Renata walked in. She looked nothing like the woman in the pristine silk blouse from the arbitration room. Her hair was pulled back in a messy clip, and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. She wore a tailored blazer, but it was dusted with the fine, inescapable white concrete powder from the street construction outside. She stopped dead when she saw me standing next to Tam. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the faint, rhythmic rumble of the excavators tearing up the street outside our walls. Get out, Renata said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was brittle, like ice about to crack underfoot. We need to talk about the authorization forms you sent to Pacific Apex, I said, holding my ground. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said, get out. You don't own this building anymore. You are trespassing. You used my ain, Renata. That's a federal crime. She marched across the faded quarry tile, stopping just 3 feet from me. Up close, I could see the panic vibrating just beneath her skin. I didn't use anything. My accounts manager made a clerical error. The accounts were linked for a decade. It's an administrative oversight. A clerical error for $12,000 of king crab? I asked. And what about the linen service and the meat purveyor? Was it an oversight when you forged my signature on the credit application? I didn't forge anything, she hissed, glancing nervously at Tam, who had backed away against the stainless steel sinks, his head down. You left this place in a mess. You gutted the operational accounts. You gutted them. I corrected her, keeping my voice dead level. To pay the penalty for the money you stole. Do not try to gaslight me in the kitchen our father built. She flinched at the mention of our father, but the vulnerability was instantly swallowed by a vicious, defensive pride. You think you're so smart, she sneered, crossing her arms. You think you walked away clean with your little catering company. But you're still on the primary lease guarantor files for the heavy equipment, the blast chillers, the convection ovens. I stared at her. The ambient noise of the kitchen seemed to fade out, leaving only the ringing in my ears. What are you talking about? I demanded. Renata smiled. It was an ugly, desperate expression. The buyout transferred the assets. It transferred the physical property. But the leasing company for the kitchen hardware requires a 90-day review period to remove a primary guarantor. Bowen checked the fine print yesterday. She took a step closer, the concrete dust on her blazer smelling like dry earth and ruin. I have no cash flow because of the street outside, Renata whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, hollow intensity. I haven't paid the equipment leases in 2 months. They're coming to repossess the kitchen next week. And when they do, they're going to come after your personal credit to cover the delinquency. You didn't cut the cord, sister. You just handed me the scissors, and I'm taking you down with me. I didn't blink. I just looked at the frantic, glassy sheen in her eyes. She was breathing shallowly, her chest rising and falling under the dust-covered blazer. The silence in the kitchen stretched out, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the street excavators outside. You're bluffing, I said. Call them, she shot back. Her voice cracked, betraying the fear she was trying to mask with venom. Call Trask Commercial Equipment. Ask for the primary guarantor file on the walk-ins and the 6-burner ranges. Bowen checked it last night when the final notice arrived. You're on it. Dad put you on it 6 years ago when his credit dipped, and you never took yourself off. She was right. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold wash of adrenaline pooling in my stomach. When Dad got sick, medical bills had eaten into his credit score. We needed new blast chillers. I had co-signed the master lease agreement. I completely forgot about it during the arbitration, because it wasn't an asset, it was a liability. Arlo had focused on the brick and mortar, the brand, the operational cash. We assumed the liabilities transferred with the LLC, but personal guarantees don't care about LLCs. They care about social security numbers. I looked past her to Tam. He was staring at the cutting board, his hands gripping the edge of the steel table so hard his knuckles were white. He was a 50-year-old man who just wanted to prep his stations and go home to his family. And he was watching the legacy of the only kitchen he had ever loved turn into a toxic landfill. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, Tam, I said quietly. I didn't look at Renata again. I turned and walked out the back door, stepping into the alley where the air smelled of diesel exhaust and wet concrete. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed Arlo. He picked up on the second ring. Did you go down there? I'm still here, I said, leaning against the brick wall of the alley. Arlo, pull the buyout agreement. Look at the equipment leases. Trask Commercial. I heard the sound of typing, followed by a heavy sigh. I'm looking at the indemnification clause now. It states that the new sole proprietor, Renata, assumes all financial responsibility for the physical assets and their associated debts. She hasn't paid them, I said, my voice tight. She's 2 months delinquent. She said the leasing company requires a 90-day review period to remove a primary guarantor. Is that true? There was a long pause. When Arlo spoke again, he sounded infinitely tired. Yes, it's standard for commercial heavy equipment. The indemnification clause means she is legally obligated to pay it, and if she doesn't, you can sue her for the damages. But the leasing company money is a third party. They didn't sign the arbitration agreement. If her name is on the LLC but your name is on the personal guarantee, they will come after whoever has the money. If they report a massive delinquency on my personal credit, it tanks my catering company, I said, rubbing the bridge of my nose, trying to stave off a sudden, vicious headache. Lock Provisions runs on 2 massive lines of credit. If my score drops, the bank calls those notes in. I lose the delivery vans. I lose the warehouse lease. She knows this. She's using it to hold me hostage. How much is the delinquency? I don't know. The equipment is worth 80 grand easy. The monthly lease has to be a few thousand. But if she defaults entirely, they accelerate the lease. They demand the full balance, or they send repo men to rip the ranges out of the wall. Don't pay it yet, Arlo warned. If you pay her debts without a legal framework, you set a precedent of assuming the liability. Let me call Trask Commercial. I'll find out exactly what the arrears are and if we can freeze the account. I hung up and walked back to my truck. The parking garage attendant gave me a sympathetic look as I paid my ticket. I guess I looked as worn out as I felt. I drove back to the Lock Provisions warehouse in silence. The radio was off. My mind was spinning, calculating cash flow, vendor payments, and payroll. We were catering a massive 500-person tech retreat that weekend. It was a $50,000 contract. Half was paid up front, which went straight into supplies and labor. The other half was due net 30 after the event. When I walked into the warehouse, the contrast to the flagship was jarring. The space was bright, loud, and moving with purpose. My sous chef, Imogen, was barking orders at 2 prep cooks who were assembling hundreds of individual charcuterie boxes. The smell of fresh rosemary and curing meats filled the air. This was mine. I built this away from Renata's toxic orbit, and now she was dragging her dead weight over the firewall. I went into my small glass-walled office and shut the door, muting the sounds of the kitchen. I opened my laptop and pulled up my banking dashboard. We were healthy, but commercial catering requires massive liquid capital. I couldn't just absorb an $80,000 accelerated equipment lease because my sister was throwing a tantrum. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Lachlan at Pacific Apex Seafood. I need a new card on file for your weekend order. Management locked the lock until the Ein dispute is resolved. Sorry, I slammed my hand onto the desk. The credit freeze was already happening. Renata's fraudulent attempts to use my tax ID had spooked the vendors. I grabbed my company credit card, typed the numbers into a secure payment link Lachlan sent, and drained $12,000 of my operating cash just to ensure the tech retreat had their salmon and crab. An hour later, Arlo called back. I talked to a collections manager at Trask Commercial named Vesper, Arlo said. He didn't sound happy. The arrears are $14,000. That covers 2 months of missed payments plus late fees. But it gets worse. Of course it does. Renata didn't just miss the payments. She violated the maintenance clause. The flagship's primary walk-in cooler had a compressor failure 3 weeks ago. Instead of calling Trask's authorized repair service, which she couldn't afford, she hired some unlicensed guy off Craigslist to patch it. He voided the warranty. Trask sent an inspector yesterday. They are accelerating the lease. I closed my eyes. How much, Arlo? $62,000. Due by Friday at 5 p.m. If it's not paid, they are sending a repossession team on Monday morning to gut the kitchen. And they are reporting the default to all 3 credit bureaus under your social security number. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. She really did it. She drove it straight off the cliff. If they report that default, my bank will flag the Lock Provisions accounts by Tuesday. They'll freeze my working capital. We can sue her, Arlo said, but the words lacked their usual bite. We have the arbitration agreement. She is in breach. We can file an emergency injunction. An injunction takes weeks. Friday is in 2 days. Even if we win a judgment against a woman who has no money, a restaurant on a dead street, and a mountain of debt. You can't squeeze blood from a stone, Arlo, so what do you want to do? I looked out through the glass walls of my office. Imogen was laughing with one of the prep cooks, perfectly arranging microgreens. I had 30 employees who relied on me. I had built a lifeboat, and Renata was trying to drill a hole in the bottom just so she wouldn't drown alone. I want to talk to Vesper at Trask Commercial, I said. Send me her direct line. What are you going to do? I'm going to negotiate, I said, though my stomach was tying itself into knots. I called the number Arlo texted me. Vesper picked up on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of empathy. She dealt with failing restaurants every day. We were just a line item in a spreadsheet of bad bets. This is Vesper. Hi, Vesper. I'm calling about the flagship lease. I'm the original guarantor. Arlo's client, she said. I've already explained the situation to your attorney. The arbitration agreement you signed with your sister is not our concern. Our contract is with you. The warranty is voided. The account is delinquent. $62,000 by Friday. I know, I said, keeping my voice even. I'm not calling to beg for an extension. I'm calling to make a purchase offer. Silence on the line. A purchase offer? If you send a repo team on Monday, you have to pay labor to rip that equipment out. You have to transport it. You have to store it in a warehouse. Then you have to auction it off as used, damaged goods because the compressor is shot. You'll be lucky to recoup 30 cents on the dollar. We write off the loss, Vesper said coldly. It's standard operating procedure. Write it off to me, I said. I will wire you $35,000 cash tomorrow morning. In exchange, Trask completely severs the lease agreement, releases my personal guarantee, and transfers the title of the equipment to Lock Provisions LLC. Vesper let out a low breath. You want to buy the equipment out from under your sister. It's already in my name. I just want the title. You get $35,000 in liquid cash immediately. 0 repossession overhead, and the delinquent account is closed. No credit reporting. I could hear her clicking away on her keyboard. My heart was hammering against my ribs. $35,000 was almost all the reserve cash I had left after paying for the weekend's seafood. If I did this, I was flying without a net for the next 30 days. 1 canceled catering gig, 1 blown tire on a van, and I wouldn't make payroll. $40,000, Vesper countered, and I need the wire confirmation by noon tomorrow. Deal, I said. Send the transfer paperwork to Arlo. I hung up and pressed my hands over my face, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I had just bought a kitchen full of commercial equipment that was currently sitting inside a building I no longer owned, controlled by a sister who hated me. But she didn't know I owned it yet. She thought I was cornered. I spent the rest of the day working on the line with Imogen, needing the repetitive, mindless task of chopping and prepping to keep the anxiety at bay. By the time I left the warehouse, it was past 9 at night. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked to my truck. It was a text from Tam. She didn't make payroll today. Told the front of house staff she was withholding their credit card tips to cover a produce delivery. 2 servers walked out. It's getting ugly. I sat in the cab of my truck, staring at the glowing screen. The restaurant industry is built on a fragile ecosystem of trust. You can serve mediocre food, you can have bad lighting, but the second you mess with the staff's money, the ecosystem collapses. Withholding tips is illegal. It's desperate. It meant Bowen's venture capital money wasn't coming to save her. He had cut her off. I started the engine and drove toward the flagship. I didn't plan to go inside. I just needed to see it. When I parked down the block, the street was entirely dark. The construction crew had left for the night, leaving behind their massive yellow machines parked on the torn-up dirt. The restaurant's neon sign was buzzing, a sickly, flickering red light reflecting off the plastic barricades. I sat there for 20 minutes, just watching. I saw the back alley door open. A figure stepped out into the shadows. It was Tam. He was carrying a cardboard box. He set it down by the dumpsters, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the brick wall. He looked completely defeated. I got out of the truck and walked over to him, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just offered me a drag of his cigarette. I don't smoke, but I took it anyway, the harsh smoke burning my throat. You quit? I asked, looking at the cardboard box. I could see the handles of his personal knife roll sticking out of the top. She fired me, Tam said, his voice flat. I told her she couldn't keep the servers' tips. She told me I was insubordinate and told me to pack my knives. I looked at the box, then back at Tam, a man who had given 15 years of his life, his evenings, his weekends, his holidays, to my family's business. Discarded in an alley because he tried to stop a thief from stealing again. You want a job? I asked. Law provisions, morning shifts, no nights, no weekends unless it's a premium event, full benefits. I match whatever you were making here. Tam looked at me, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. You can afford that? I'll make it work, I said. Start tomorrow at 8. Tam dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his shoe. He picked up his box. See you at 8. He walked away down the alley, leaving me standing alone by the back door of the flagship. I looked at the heavy steel security door. I owned the ovens inside. I owned the walk-in cooler that was currently broken. I owned the fryers and the prep tables. And tomorrow, I was going to have Arlo draft a very specific letter to my sister regarding the rent she now owed me for using my equipment. Arlo had the letter drafted by 9:00 a.m. the next morning. I sat in my office drinking black coffee, reading the PDF he had emailed over. It was a masterpiece of dry, legal suffocation. Since Trask Commercial had officially released the title of the kitchen equipment to Lock Provisions, I was now the sole legal owner of every burner, fryer, and refrigeration unit inside the flagship. I was effectively Renata's landlord for the very tools she needed to boil water. Arlo set the monthly equipment rental fee at a fair market rate of $4,500, due on the first of every month. He also included a mandatory $10,000 security deposit, citing her documented history of voiding maintenance warranties with unlicensed repairs. The final paragraph was the hammer. It stated that if the deposit and first month's rent were not wired to Lock Provisions by 5 p.m. on Friday, a private extraction crew would arrive Monday morning to remove my property from her premises. I told Arlo to send it via bonded courier directly to the restaurant. She had to sign for it by hand. At 7:45 a.m., Tam walked into the warehouse. He looked entirely different than the defeated man in the alley. He wasn't wearing the thin, stained linen of the flagship. He had on a pristine white chef's coat he must have kept in the back of his closet for years. Imogen met him at the stainless steel prep stations. She didn't ask questions. I had already briefed her. She just handed him a freshly sharpened 8-inch chef's knife and pointed him toward 80 pounds of root vegetables that needed a precise brunoise cut for the tech retreat. I watched Tam test the edge of the blade on his thumb. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He nodded to Imogen and got straight to work. The rhythm of his chopping was fast, even, and perfect. I went out onto the floor to help them assemble the charcuterie boxes. We were in the weeds, but it was a good kind of stress. The kind of stress that ends with a paycheck and a satisfied client, not a court summons. We worked in a comfortable, focused silence for 3 hours. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Renata. I had expected her to call screaming the second the courier handed her the envelope. Instead, the caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately. It was Blythe, the senior event coordinator for the massive tech retreat we were catering that weekend. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the quiet of the dry storage pantry to take it. Blythe, hi, I said, putting on my best vendor voice. Just confirming the final head count for Saturday. We're prepping the salmon today. We need to pause the prep, Blythe said. Her tone wasn't friendly. It was tight, clipped, and heavy with corporate panic. The hair on my arms stood up. Is there a problem with the venue? There's a problem with you, Blythe said. I just got off a very long, very disturbing phone call with a woman named Renata. She told me she is the managing director of the parent company that oversees Lock Provisions. She informed me that your LLC is currently under federal investigation for tax fraud and that your operational accounts have been frozen. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against a wire rack of canned tomatoes. Blythe, that is absolutely not true. Renata is my sister. We just went through a bitter business separation. She does not own Lock Provisions. I am the sole proprietor. There is no investigation. She sent me court documents. Blythe countered, her voice rising. She sent me an arbitration ledger showing $112,000 in fraudulent transfers. My stomach dropped. Renata had taken the forensic accounting ledger, the exact document proving her embezzlement, and weaponized it. To an outsider who didn't understand the legal jargon or the context of the arbitration, it just looked like a massive ledger of stolen money, with both our family names attached to it. Blythe, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. That ledger was from her theft. laughed. Not mine. I caught her. That's why we split. Lock Provisions is entirely separate, fully funded, and your event is completely secure. We have your salmon on ice right now. I can't take that risk, Blythe said. I have 500 executives flying in from all over the country. If the caterer gets locked out of their bank accounts on Friday and can't pay their staff or rent their delivery trucks, I lose my job. Renata offered me a solution. I gripped the metal shelf tight enough to hurt my fingers. What solution? She said she has a fully operational brick-and-mortar restaurant downtown. She offered to step in and fulfill the catering contract directly through the flagship to ensure there's no disruption. And she offered to do it at a 20% discount for the inconvenience. I couldn't breathe for a second. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it. Renata had no food. She had a broken walk-in cooler. She had a staff that was actively walking out because she was stealing their tips. She had a street choked by excavators and chain link fences. She was completely incapable of executing a 500-person remote catering gig. But she didn't care about the food. She just wanted Blythe's money. The tech contract was $50,000. Blythe had already paid me $25,000 upfront as a deposit. The remaining $25,000 was due after the event. Renata was trying to steal the contract so Blythe would wire her the remaining balance, or at least a new, heavily discounted deposit, just so Renata could get her hands on some fast, liquid cash to stave off her own collapse. Blythe, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Did you sign anything with her? Not yet, Blythe said defensively. But I have a fiduciary duty to my company to secure this event. She sent over a revised contract. I told her I would review it with our legal department this afternoon. But I am formally requesting a full refund of our $25,000 deposit. We are canceling our contract with Lock Provisions. The pantry suddenly felt very small. I didn't have her deposit anymore. I had spent $12,000 of it yesterday buying the king crab and salmon in cash because Renata had ruined my credit line with the seafood vendor. I had spent the other $13,000 plus $22,000 of my own emergency reserves to buy the kitchen equipment out from under Trask Commercial. My operational accounts were completely drained until the second half of Blythe's payment cleared next week. If I refunded Blythe right now, Lock Provisions would bounce payroll on Friday. We would default on our warehouse lease. I would be instantly bankrupt. I can't refund you, Blythe. The contract clearly states the deposit is non-refundable within 14 days of the event because the capital has already been allocated to purchasing the raw materials. I bought your seafood yesterday. Then you can sell it to someone else. Blythe snapped. If you don't wire that money back by close of business today, our legal department will sue you for breach of contract and fraud. Do not test me on this. You have until 5 p.m. The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I could hear Imogen and Tam laughing out in the kitchen, the steady rhythmic sound of knives on cutting boards, the hum of a business I had poured my entire life into. Renata wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was actively trying to burn my lifeboat. I walked out of the pantry. I didn't say a word to Imogen or Tam. I grabbed my keys off the desk in my office and walked out into the bright mid-morning sun. I got into my truck, started the engine, and dialed Arlo. He didn't answer. It went straight to voicemail. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and pulled out of the parking lot, heading straight for the city. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that if I didn't stop Renata from signing that contract with Blythe today, I was going to lose everything I had built. The drive into downtown was agonizingly slow, choked with midday traffic. By the time I navigated around the massive detour signs surrounding the flagship, it was 1:15 p.m. I parked in the same garage, walked the 3 blocks, and went straight to the front doors this time. The restaurant looked abandoned from the outside. The orange plastic barricades were pushed right up to the front windows. A thick layer of concrete dust obscured the glass. I grabbed the brass handle of the front door and pulled. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The dining room was empty. The tables were set with white linen and polished silverware, but there wasn't a single customer. It was the middle of the lunch rush, and the place was a ghost town. The air conditioning was off. The room felt warm and stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and desperation. A lone hostess was standing behind the podium, scrolling on her phone. She looked up, startled. She was young, maybe 19, a new hire who clearly didn't recognize me. Table for one? She asked, her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. I'm here to see Renata, I said. Before the girl could answer, the door to the manager's office behind the bar clicked open. Renata stepped out. She was holding a stack of papers and a pen. When she saw me standing in the middle of the dining room, she froze. She looked worse than she had yesterday. Her blazer was wrinkled, and she was gripping the papers so tightly the edges were crumpled. What are you doing here? She demanded, marching toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. I told you yesterday. You are trespassing. You called Blythe, I said, skipping the preamble entirely. Renata stopped a few feet away. A nasty, triumphant smile curled the corner of her mouth. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to hide it. It's a free market. Clients are allowed to seek alternative vendors when their primary contractor is experiencing financial instability. You lied to her, I said, my voice echoing in the empty restaurant. You sent her my forensic accounting ledger and told her it was a federal investigation against me. You are trying to steal a $50,000 contract you have absolutely no capacity to fulfill. I can fulfill it perfectly well, Renata snapped. With what food? I asked, gesturing toward the kitchen doors. Your walk-in is broken. Your credit with Pacific Apex is frozen. Tam walked out last night, and half your servers quit because you're stealing their tips. You can't even serve a lunch rush, let alone prep a 500-person remote event by Saturday. I'll figure it out, she yelled, losing her composure for a second. She took a deep breath, smoothing her hair back. I have the deposit coming. Once the tech company wires me the $25,000, I can pay the vendors in cash. I can fix the cooler. It's called bridging capital. It's what real business owners do. You want her deposit because you're broke, I said flatly. But you're not getting it. Blythe wants her money back from me. Money I don't have, because I spent it buying the equipment you're standing in front of right now. Renata's triumphant smile faltered. She blinked, confused. What equipment? I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the folded copy of the courier letter Arlo had sent, and held it out to her. The letter you refused to sign for this morning. Vesper at Trask Commercial commercial sold me the title to the kitchen. I am your landlord now. And if you don't call Blythe back right now, tell her you lied, and withdraw your bid. I am calling the repo team to come take the ovens this afternoon. Renata stared at the paper in my hand like it was a live grenade. She reached out slowly, snatched it from my fingers, and unfolded it. Her eyes darted back and forth across the page as she read Arlo's sterile, devastating legal prose. I watched the color completely drain from her face. I watched the realization hit her that she hadn't just lost the arbitration. She had lost the actual, physical ability to run the restaurant she had fought so hard to steal. She lowered the paper. Her hands were shaking. But instead of surrendering, a cold, dead look settled behind her eyes. You think you won, she whispered. Call Blythe, I repeated. Call her right now on speakerphone. Renata let out a harsh, dry laugh. She crumpled the letter in her fist and threw it onto the floor. I can't call her and withdraw the bid. Yes, you can. No, Renata said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a toxic hiss. I can't, because I didn't just send her the ledger. I sent her a cease and desist letter drafted by Bowen's legal team. We claimed intellectual property theft. I stared at her. What are you talking about? The menu you pitched to the tech retreat, Renata said, a manic edge creeping into her voice. The cedar plank salmon, the braised short rib crostinis, the heirloom tomato tartlets. I pulled your proposal from the old shared server before the arbitration closed. Those are legacy recipes. Dad's recipes. They belong to the flagship. They belong to me. She took a step back, gesturing grandly to the empty dining room. Bowen's lawyers filed an emergency injunction at 10 o'clock this morning, she said, her eyes wide and desperate. We sued law provisions for corporate espionage and IP theft. The court granted a temporary freeze on your LLC. You can't legally serve that food on Saturday. Even if Blythe wanted to keep you, she can't. I didn't just offer to cater the event. I made it legally impossible for you to do it. I didn't argue with her. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened my business banking app. The screen loaded for 3 agonizing seconds before a solid red banner appeared across the top of my dashboard. Account restricted, contact branch manager. She wasn't bluffing. She hadn't just filed a piece of paper. She had actually convinced a judge to freeze my operating capital. I looked up from the screen. Renata was watching me, her breathing shallow, her eyes burning with a manic, hollow vindication. She didn't look like a successful restaurateur. She looked like a cornered animal that had just figured out how to bite through its own leg to escape a trap, perfectly willing to bleed to death as long as I died first. You froze my operating capital over a cedar plank salmon recipe, I said, my voice dead flat. I protected my intellectual property, she corrected, stepping back behind the podium. Dad's recipes belong to the flagship. They are the core asset of the brand I retained in the arbitration. You used them to secure a massive corporate contract under a separate entity. That's corporate espionage. Bowen's firm handles these kinds of injunctions before breakfast. Bowen, of course. This had the sterile, bloodless precision of a venture capitalist's playbook. You don't actually have to win the lawsuit to destroy your competitor. You just have to freeze their assets long enough that they miss payroll and default on their contracts. The preliminary injunction starves them to death before they ever see the inside of a courtroom. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the crumpled Trask commercial letter at her. I just turned around and walked out of the empty, suffocating dining room, pulling the heavy brass doors shut behind me. The noise of the street excavators immediately swallowed the silence. I called Arlo the second I was back in my truck. Tell me you didn't know about this, I said when he picked up. I'm looking at the electronic docket right now, Arlo said. I could hear the furious clicking of his keyboard. They filed it at 8:00 a.m. under seal and walked it directly to a duty judge at 9:30. Ex parte emergency injunction. They claimed immediate and irreparable harm if you were allowed to serve that menu on Saturday. The judge rubber stamped a temporary freeze on your primary accounts until a hearing. When is the hearing, Arlo? Monday morning. The event is Saturday, I said, gripping the steering wheel so hard my forearms ached. If I don't have access to my capital by tomorrow morning, I can't pay the rental company for the refrigerated box trucks. If I don't have the trucks, I can't transport the food. If I don't transport the food, I breach the contract with the tech company. And Blythe's legal department sues me for the deposit I've already spent. My business dies on Saturday. That's exactly what Bowen is counting on, Arlo said grimly. It's a classic squeeze play. They don't care about the recipes. They care about making you default so Renata can step in and scoop the contract. Or at least force you into a settlement where you forgive her equipment lease in exchange for lifting the freeze. Can we fight the injunction today? Quash it? I can file an emergency motion to dissolve the TRO, Arlo said, his voice tightening. But I have to prove to the judge that the underlying claim is entirely without merit. I need the recipe book, and I need the exact menu you pitched to Blythe. Did you use your father's recipes? I let out a harsh breath, staring through the dusty windshield at the massive orange barricades blocking the street. No, Arlo, that's the most insane part about this. Dad's legacy menu was classic, old-school coastal seafood, heavy butter sauces, flour roux, gluten everywhere. The tech retreat is for 500 Silicon Valley executives. They requested a hyper-modern, gluten-free, dairy-free menu. We're doing a blistered heirloom tomato tartlet with a cashew milk ricotta. We're doing a cold-smoked salmon on a root vegetable rosti. There isn't a single recipe on my prep list that even remotely resembles the legacy book. Then why did they claim you stole them? Because the names sound similar to a layman, I said, the realization clicking into place. Dad had a smoked salmon appetizer. Dad had a tomato tart. Renata just took the titles from my pitch deck, put them next to the index of Dad's recipe book, and told a judge I stole the intellectual property. She lied by omission. I can work with that, Arlo said. Send me your full prep lists, the client dietary requirements, and the final approved menu. I'll draft the motion to dissolve. But I have to warn you, getting a judge to read a menu comparison and reverse an injunction in 48 hours is a massive long shot. File it anyway, I said, and hung up. I drove back to the Lock Provisions warehouse in a state of cold, mechanical hyperfocus. The panic was there, beating against the inside of my ribs, but I shoved it down. I couldn't afford it right now. I had 30 employees depending on me, and a walk-in cooler full of premium seafood that was ticking down to a very expensive expiration date. When I walked through the double doors of the warehouse, the contrast to the dead flagship restaurant was almost painful. The kitchen was humming. The massive exhaust hoods roared overhead. Tam was at his station, methodically breaking down a crate of king salmon with beautiful sweeping cuts. Imogen was at the stoves, reducing a massive vat of balsamic glaze. The air smelled vibrant and alive. I walked straight to my glass-walled office, shut the door, and opened my laptop. I needed to figure out exactly how much liquid cash I had access to that wasn't tied to the frozen LLC accounts. I logged into my personal checking account. I had $412. I had drained my emergency reserves yesterday to buy the kitchen equipment from Trask Commercial. My personal credit cards were already maxed from floating the business during the initial arbitration phase. I was completely, terrifyingly illiquid. My desk phone rang. It was Thad, the dispatch manager at the commercial truck rental fleet we used for large-scale events. Hey, just running the card on file for the 3 refrigerated box trucks for Saturday, Thad said, chewing loudly on something. It declined. Tried it twice. Bank threw a fraud code. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, closing my eyes. Hey, Thad. Yeah, the bank is doing a security audit on the main account. Can I bring you a cashier's check on Friday morning? You know the policy, Thad said, sounding completely unsympathetic. No payment, no reservation. I got 2 other caterers begging for 20-foot reefers this weekend. If I don't have a valid card on file by 5 p.m. today, I gotta release the trucks. Thad, we've rented from you for 4 years. We've never missed a payment, and I appreciate the business, but my boss doesn't care about 4 years ago. He cares about the $4,000 you owe us for the weekend rental. 5 p.m. Call me back when you got a card that works. He clicked off. I set the phone down. $4,000. I needed $4,000 by 5 o'clock, or the salmon Tam was currently filleting would rot on the loading dock. There was a sharp knock on the glass of my office door. Imogen stood there, her brow furrowed. She held a stainless steel mixing bowl in one hand and her cell phone in the other. I waved her in. We have a problem, she said, sliding the door shut behind her. I just got an email from Blythe's assistant at the tech company. They're demanding we halt all prep. They said if we deliver the food on Saturday, they will refuse it at the loading dock, and their on-site security has been instructed to turn our staff away. I leaned back in my chair. The corporate death spiral was accelerating. Blythe wasn't just canceling the contract. She was building a physical wall to ensure I couldn't force delivery and claim fulfillment. Renata had completely poisoned the well. Did she mention the injunction? I asked. Imogen nodded, her expression hardening. She attached a copy of the temporary restraining order. She said our company is an active legal liability. What the hell is going on? Did your sister actually sue us over a tomato tart? She's trying to bankrupt us before Monday, I said, keeping my voice steady. I owed Imogen the truth. She had left a cushy executive sous chef job at a luxury hotel to help me build law provisions. The accounts are frozen. The trucks are going to be canceled at 5 o'clock, and the client just told us to go to hell. Imogen stared at me, the mixing bowl resting against her hip. She didn't panic. She didn't threaten to quit. She just looked out through the glass at the prep floor, at Tam meticulously pulling pin bones from the salmon, at the sheer volume of food we had already committed to. Okay, Imogen said softly. So we have 48 hours to fix it. Do we stop prepping? No, I said instantly. We do not stop prepping. If we stop, we breach our own contract. If we show up on Saturday with the food exactly as ordered, the breach is on them. We hold the line. You and Tam keep going. Imogen nodded once, a sharp professional gesture, and walked back out to the line. I looked back at my computer screen. I needed $4,000 for the trucks, and I needed Blythe to rescind the cancellation. Arlo was working on the legal side, but I couldn't wait for a judge who might not even read the file until Friday afternoon. I opened a new tab and typed in the name of the tech company Blythe worked for. I scrolled past their slick corporate homepage, past the investor relations tab, and clicked on the executive leadership directory. Blythe was the senior event coordinator, but she reported to someone. She was terrified of losing her job because 500 executives were flying in. I found the name I was looking for. Dorian Farrow, vice president of operations. He was the man signing the checks for the retreat. He was the man Blythe was terrified of disappointing. I picked up my cell phone, bypassed the main switchboard by calling the direct executive line listed in the vendor packet, and asked the assistant for Dorian Farrow. Mr. Farrow is in a meeting, the assistant said smoothly. May I ask what this is regarding? This is the primary catering vendor for the executive retreat on Saturday, I said. Please tell Mr. Farrow that his event coordinator is about to leave 500 of his senior staff with absolutely no food, and she is doing it based on fraudulent legal documents submitted by a bankrupt third party. Tell him I need 5 minutes of his time, or Saturday is going to be a disaster. There was a very long pause on the line. I heard the faint clicking of a hold track. My thumb started doing that slight nervous tremor again, tapping against the edge of my desk. A minute later, the line clicked. This is Dorian Farrow, a deep, impatient voice said. I have exactly 3 minutes before my next call. Why are you threatening my Saturday retreat? I'm not threatening it, Mr. Farrow. I'm trying to save it. Blythe just canceled my contract and instructed security to turn my delivery trucks away. She did this because my sister, who I just legally separated from in a bitter corporate dispute, sent her a temporary injunction claiming intellectual property theft over the menu. I am aware of the injunction, Dorian said coldly. Blythe forwarded it to our legal department an hour ago. We do not entangle ourselves in vendor litigation. If you are legally barred from serving the food, we have to source an alternative. I am not legally barred from serving the food. I corrected him. The injunction is based on a lie. They claimed I am serving legacy recipes from my former restaurant. I am not. I am serving the exact custom, allergen-free menu your team approved last month. I can send you the side-by-side comparison right now. It's a frivolous ex parte filing designed to freeze my operating capital so I default, allowing my sister to swoop in and take your money. And why should I care about your family drama? Dorian asked. I need food on plates. Because my sister's restaurant has a broken walk-in walk-in cooler, 0 credit with local purveyors, and a staff that is actively quitting, I said, leaning forward, pressing the phone hard against my ear. She cannot feed your people, Mr. Farrow. If you give her that contract, you will have 500 hungry executives eating cold deli sandwiches on Saturday afternoon. I have your king salmon in my kitchen right now. I have your heirloom tomatoes. My staff is prepping it as we speak. I am not asking for more money. I am asking you to tell Blythe to stand down, honor the contract, and let me do my job. Silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. Your accounts are frozen, Dorian finally said, identifying the real weak point with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate operator. How are you paying for your refrigerated transport? I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. I have a logistical hurdle with the truck rental company. I need $4,000 to secure the vehicles before 5 o'clock today. So you are asking me for an advance. I'm asking you to protect your investment. I don't issue vendor advances, and I don't override my event coordinators based on a phone call, Dorian said. The line felt incredibly cold, but I also don't like being played by desperate subcontractors. If your sister's restaurant is as compromised as you say it is, that is a severe vetting failure on Blythe's part. Send someone to look. I challenged him. Send someone to the flagship restaurant downtown. The street is completely torn up. The dining room is empty. Then send them to my warehouse. Look at the operation. Look at the food. You pride yourself on data, Mr. Farrow. Look at the data. Dorian didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, I will have our legal team review the menu comparison. Send it to my assistant. If the injunction is as frivolous as you claim, we will hold the contract open. But I will not advance you a dime for those trucks. If you want this account, you figure out the logistics. You have until Saturday morning. He hung up. It wasn't a win. But it wasn't a complete execution, either. He hadn't agreed to reinstate the contract, but he had opened the door a fraction of an inch. I immediately drafted an email to his assistant, attaching the side-by-side menu comparison Arlo had requested, detailing exactly how a cashew milk ricotta tart was fundamentally different from a traditional buttercrust quiche. I hit send. It was 3:14 p.m. I had less than 2 hours to find $4,000 for the rental trucks. I walked out of my office and stood on the edge of the prep floor. Tam was finishing the last of the salmon. Imogen was labeling the vacuum-sealed bags of glaze. They were working so hard, completely trusting that I would solve the invisible crises hovering over their heads. I looked around the warehouse, the massive stainless steel prep tables, the walk-in coolers, the heavy-duty stand mixers. It was all owned by Lock Revisions outright, but I couldn't pawn a commercial stand mixer in 2 hours. Then I remembered the letter Arlo had sent to Renata that morning. I pulled my phone out and called Arlo again. Did she sign it? I asked the second he picked up. Did who sign what? Arlo asked, sounding exhausted. The courier letter, the lease agreement for the flagship's kitchen equipment. I know she refused to take it from me when I went down there, but did the bonded courier get a signature from her staff? Let me check the tracking portal, Arlo said. I heard typing. Yes, it was signed for at 10:42 a.m. by a hostess at the podium. It was legally served. Why? The letter stated she owes Lock Provisions a $10,000 security deposit for the equipment, right? Yes, due by Friday at 5 p.m. Or, we pull the equipment. I don't want to wait until Friday, I said, a dangerous, reckless idea forming in my head. If she's holding the equipment hostage and actively refusing to acknowledge the lease, she's technically in possession of stolen property. Don't do it, Arlo warned instantly, reading my tone. Do not go down there and try to rip a 6-burner range out of the wall yourself. You will be arrested for trespassing and vandalism, and then the injunction won't matter. I'm not going to rip it out of the wall, I said. But I need $4,000 for these trucks, Arlo, and I currently own $80,000 worth of commercial kitchen equipment, sitting in a building controlled by a woman who is trying to bankrupt me. There has to be a way to leverage that asset right now. There isn't a bank in the world that will write you a collateralized loan in 2 hours based on equipment located in a hostile third-party building, Arlo said. It's too messy. He was right. Banks wouldn't touch it. But the restaurant industry wasn't just built on banks. It was built on a secondary, gray market ecosystem of liquidators, auction houses, and cash-in-hand buyers who scavenged failing restaurants like vultures. Who did we use to liquidate Dad's old suburban location 5 years ago? I asked. Arlo sighed heavily. A guy named Jasper. He runs a commercial restaurant supply salvage yard out in the industrial district. Why? Text me his number. He's a shark, Arlo warned. He pays pennies on the dollar, and he only deals in clean titles. I have a clean title from Trask Commercial, I said. Just send the number. I hung up and waited. A moment later, a contact card pinged onto my screen. Jasper Wolf Salvage. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a gruff, gravelly voice answered. Wolf, Jasper, my name is... I know who you are. Jasper interrupted. I liquidated your old man's strip mall joint. Good ovens. You kept them clean. What do you want? I want to sell you a primary walk-in cooler compressor unit, 2 commercial fryers, and a heavy-duty Hobart stand mixer. Where are they? Sitting in the kitchen of the downtown flagship, I said. Jasper let out a low whistle. The flagship. I heard your sister took that over in the split. Word on the street is she's bleeding out. Construction killed the foot traffic. She is bleeding out, I confirmed. But I own the equipment. I bought the title out from under her from Trask Commercial yesterday. The paper is totally clean. It's in my name. If it's in her building, it's a headache to extract, Jasper said, his tone instantly shifting into negotiation mode. I gotta send a crew. I gotta deal with the landlord. I gotta worry about her calling the cops saying I'm robbing the place. You won't have to deal with her, I said, because you're not going to extract it. Then what the hell am I buying? You're buying the paper, I said, my heart hammering. I will sell you the clear title to the fryers and the Hobart mixer right now for $5,000 cash. They are worth 15. Easily. You hold the title. When she inevitably goes entirely bankrupt and gets locked out of the building next month, you walk in with the deed and take them. It's a guaranteed return. You just have to wait a few weeks. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of a forklift backing up in the background of Jasper's yard. You're selling me a future claim on a failing restaurant, Jasper said slowly. That's a lot of risk. She could strip the place and sell the copper wiring before the bank locks the doors. She won't. She's too arrogant to think she's going to lose, I said. $5,000, Jasper. I will email you the Trask title transfer right now. You verify it, and you hand me the cash in an hour. 4,000, Jasper countered. And you include the blast chiller. I winced. The blast chiller alone was worth 12 grand. But I looked up at the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. Thad was going to cancel the trucks in an hour and 15 minutes. Done, I said. I'll be at your yard in 30 minutes with the paperwork. I printed the title transfer directly from my email, signed the seller line, and grabbed my keys. Jasper's salvage yard was a sprawling dirt lot out past the shipping channels, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire and packed tight with the rusted skeletons of failed restaurants. Walk-in cooler panels, dented fryers, stacks of grease-stained exhaust hoods. Jasper was waiting in a trailer office that smelled like stale tobacco and ozone. He didn't smile when I walked in. He took the printed title, put on a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses, and scrutinized the notary stamps and the Trask commercial letterhead. Clean, he grunted. He reached into a dented metal lockbox under his laminate desk and counted out 40 worn $100 bills. He slid the stack across the table. Your sister is going to have an absolute meltdown when I show up with a dolly. Give her my best, I said, shoving the cash into my jacket pocket. It was 4:18 p.m. I didn't even get back on the highway. I took the industrial access roads straight to Thad's commercial fleet lot. I walked into his dispatch office at 4:38 p.m. and dropped the stack of hundreds squarely on his desk. Thad looked at the cash, then at me. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled a clipboard off the wall, signed the bottom line, and tossed me 3 sets of heavy keys. Reefers are fueled and pre-chilled. Have them back by Sunday noon. I walked out to the lot, unlocked the cab of the lead truck, and sat there for a full minute, just breathing in the smell of the chemical air freshener and cold diesel. Step 1 was done. I had the transport. Step 2 came at 8:15 p.m. that night. I was back at the warehouse, helping Imogen vacuum seal the last batch of marinated root vegetables. My phone buzzed on the stainless steel prep table. It was Dorian Farrow. I wiped my hands on a side towel and answered. Mr. Farrow, I had my legal department review the side-by-side menu comparison, Dorian said. His voice was just as flat and transactional as it had been that afternoon. They also reviewed the temporary restraining order your sister filed. And our general counsel determined that a cashew milk ricotta substitute does not constitute intellectual property theft of a dairy-heavy legacy recipe. The tro she obtained was granted under the assumption of identical duplication. That assumption is demonstrably false. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 3 hours. So we're still on for Saturday. We are. I've instructed Blythe to reinstate your vendor clearance. Security will let your trucks through the gates. But let me be entirely clear with you. If this family dispute bleeds onto my campus on Saturday, if there is a single disruption to my event, I won't just fire you. I will bury your catering company in breach of contract litigation until you're working the fry station at a fast food drive-thru. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Mr. Farrow. The food will be flawless. See that it is, he said, and hung up. I put the phone down. Imogen was watching me from across the table. I just nodded. She let out a sharp laugh, tossed a bunch of rosemary into a Lexan bin, and went right back to work. Saturday was a blur of calculated precision. We rolled 3 massive refrigerated trucks onto the tech campus at 6:00 a.m. Blythe met us at the loading dock. She didn't apologize, and I didn't ask for one. She just pointed us to the staging kitchens. Tam was a machine. He ran the hotline with a quiet, lethal efficiency. Imogen managed the plating, sending out 500 perfectly identical portions of blistered heirloom tomato tartlets and cedar smoked salmon. The executives ate it up. They asked for recipe cards. They asked for business cards. By 3 p.m., the kitchens were scrubbed clean, the trucks were loaded, and the balance of $25,000 was wire transferred directly into Lock Provisions' secondary holding account, entirely bypassing the frozen primary LLC. I paid Tam. I paid Imogen. I paid the rest of the staff their overtime in cash. On Monday morning, Arlo and I walked into the county courthouse for the Tro hearing. We didn't even need to argue the menu discrepancy. Renata didn't show up. Her lawyer, the one who had stuttered reading the demands in the arbitration room, appeared via Zoom, just long enough to formally withdraw the petition. Bowen had dropped her. Without his venture capital money funding her legal retainer, her lawyer had dropped her too. The judge dissolved the injunction in less than 4 minutes and unfroze my accounts. I drove back to the warehouse, but I took a detour. I took the torn-up, construction-choked street that led past the flagship. I didn't park. I just slowed the truck to a crawl as I passed the alley. A massive flatbed truck from Jasper's salvage yard was backed right up to the delivery doors. 2 huge guys in work boots were muscling the Hobart stand mixer up the hydraulic liftgate. Through the open back doors of the kitchen, I could see the gaping, empty spaces against the white tile walls where the fryers and the blast chiller used to be. Jasper was standing on the loading dock, a clipboard in his hand, arguing with a municipal police officer who was looking at a very clean, very legal title transfer document and nodding. Renata was sitting on an overturned milk crate by the dumpsters. She was wearing yesterday's clothes. Her phone was in her lap, the screen dark. She looked up as my truck idled past. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten me. She just looked at me with the hollow, empty stare of someone who had demanded everything, only to realize the sheer weight of it was going to crush her. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just took my foot off the brake, pressed the accelerator, and drove back to my kitchen. We had a 300-person wedding to prep for on Thursday, and Tam needed me to check the inventory on the halibut.